In today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we look at the damage to the USS Harry S. Truman. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So yesterday we did a detailed video on what we knew concerning the collision between the USS Harry S. Truman and the motor vessel Besiktas-M that was outbound from the Suez Canal in the area around the anchorage of the Suez on the evening of Wednesday, February 12th. We've got more information on the damage to the vessel, along with some ideas about what specifically happened. We're going to break that down for you now. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. Here's a story over at USNI News. Sam Legrone, carrier USS Harry S. Truman, hull pierced in collision, heading to port for repairs. The hull of the aircraft carrier Harry S. Truman was pierced above the waterline during a Wednesday collision with a merchant tanker. It's actually a bulk carrier, just north of the entrance to the Suez Canal. The bow of the bulker, MV Besiktas-M, collided with the starboard quarter of Truman, leaving a small gash in the side of the carrier above the waterline and piercing the hull, according to two Navy officials. Additionally, the Navy released a photo on Friday showing damage to a sponson to the rear of the starboard aircraft elevator that USNI News understands is in addition to damage to the ship further aft. As of Friday, the aircraft carrier was underway in the eastern Mediterranean and planning to pull into port so an inspection team can assess the repairs needed for the ship. So let's take a look at that damage. That damage was located on the starboard quarter, the right rear section of the ship, just aft of the main island of the vessel. The island is right here, the large structure that's up on deck. On the starboard side, the right side of the vessel, you have three elevators. Elevator one, you can see the black hole here. The elevator's in the up position here. Second elevator is just forward of the island. The third elevator is after the island. And then just after that elevator is a sponson that sticks out. This is where the damage was incurred. This is another image, earlier image of the Truman. Matter of fact, you can date this image pretty early because the ship still has the A and B crane here still mounted. This sponson right here, this projection, is where the vessel was hit. You'll notice this large pipe that runs along the vessel here. This is the exhaust for the vessel's incinerator, so that when it burns off material, garbage, this is where the incinerator is. So the incinerator is located within this sponson, and then interior of the sponson is some crewing quarters. This is the damage as released by the U.S. Navy. This image was put out on DVIDS as a defense video and imaging system. The image was taken by the Truman's rib boat going around, so you can see the damage to the sponson. Basically what happened is the starboard bow of Besiktas-M came up underneath this sponson and literally just sheared and ripped through the sponson. We'll zoom in here a little bit. You can see where insulation had been ripped out. You can see the interior of the ship right here. This is that large pipe for the incinerator. So the incinerator is sitting right here. There's a berthing area just interior of here where crew members would have been asleep. Remember, this happened at about 11:46 p.m. that evening. This was where the crane was mounted. Right now you can see a 50 caliber machine gun up here where the vessel is. Here is the number 3 elevator. So what we don't know is if this sponson has been damaged enough that it prohibits the lowering of the number 3 elevator. Favorite image in this entire picture is this sailor just sitting here looking at this going, you know, this guy's going, oh crap. That's that guy's image right there. That's an oh crap image right there from that sailor. But you can see the damage here. Fortunately, nobody was injured. We can have a little bit of humor here, but nobody was injured. The other thing we don't know, and it's alluded to in the USNI story, is that there may be more damage further aft to the left side of here. Besiktas-M came up underneath this sponson, but it could have potentially hit the vessel further aft. So there may be more hull punctures down the side of the vessel. We just don't see it from this image. This is an image I pulled off of Twitter. It shows the Harry S. Truman before the accident happened, but you see the sponson from a position up forward. And more importantly, you see the elevator number 3 lowered. Now, the cables and machinery to raise and lower it are mounted up high. So this is well above where the sponson is. So the machinery to lower and raise the elevator should be fine. What we don't know is the clearance between the sponson and the elevator. Did the damage shift the sponson and cause some material to prohibit the lowering of this elevator? If one of the 4 elevators on the Truman is out, that's a serious impact in their ability to do air operations. They can still do air operations, but it would be a limiting factor losing one of 4 elevators on board the vessel. We also have this image, which comes from a crew member on board Besiktas-M, showing the damage to the starboard bow of the vessel. So this image is looking aft. You're looking back toward the house on the vessel. Imagine being all the way up on the very front bow of the vessel. You're looking back aft. You're looking at the starboard side, the right side. You always say the starboard side when you're looking forward on a vessel. So you're looking at the starboard side of the vessel. You'll notice this large spool here that is on the deck here. Another one of these large spools are mounted. These are mooring lines. Ships' mooring lines are mounted on these spools so that you can kind of reel them off, reel them back on very quickly. Obviously, this spool came into contact with that sponson, underneath that sponson, and sheared it off. You can see where the metal has literally been ripped apart. This sponson has been, this reel has been thrown back. You'll also notice here, this is the corner of the starboard forward hatch combing for hatch number 1. This is the forward hatch. So Besiktas-M is a bulk carrier, a 50,000 ton bulk carrier, about 650 feet in length. This hatch combing obviously came up underneath the Truman's sponson and hit. You can see how the hatch combing has been bent, peeled back, damage done to this, and that's a lot of damage being done to that vessel. It's a lot of force that was exerted. What we don't know and what we don't see from any of these images is any damage to the physical bow of the Besiktas-M. I'm talking about the very front of the ship, whether or not that bow came into contact with the Truman hull and potentially caused more damage down the side of the vessel. So I had some questions from the video yesterday I want to address. Number 1, who is the commanding officer on board the Truman? It's Captain David Snowden. This comes from the Commander Naval Air Forces Atlantic. It shows you the commanding officer. He's an Annapolis grad, 96, Bachelor of Science degree in aerospace engineering. Like all captains of aircraft carriers, he is an aviator. There is a law in place, goes back to the 1930s, that require naval aviators to be in command of aircraft carriers. So he is not a ship driver. He is not a SWO, a surface warfare officer. He is an aviator. He worked on board VFA squadrons, so F-18s he obviously was a part of. He had been the executive officer on board the Truman. He had a commanding officer position on board the USS San Antonio, LPD, landing ship, then became commanding officer of San Antonio. And I'm going to imagine that he is going to be relieved here for this action. It's pretty typical for the Navy. They don't like to leave commanding officers who have issues. Unless you're the commanding officer of the Bonhomme Richard and you lose your ship in port in San Diego, then you get to keep command. Feeling here that Captain Snowden will be relieved. The USNI story says the ship is heading for port. I would envision it's heading back to Suda Bay in Crete. That's probably it's the closest port for them. They will do some assessment on the vessel, whether or not it has damage. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I also want to talk a little bit about the replay I did and some further ideas based on what may have happened. So this is marine traffic. Let's go ahead and bring this up for you. This is the nautical chart feature. I didn't use this yesterday because I didn't want to clutter up the image, but there's a couple of key things here to note. Number 1, this shows you the track of the 3 vessels in question. This is Besiktas-M coming up out of the Suez Canal. It is in the channel, as I'll show you here. This track line right here that you see snaking through, this is the Jason Dunham. This is the destroyer, the Arleigh Burke destroyer that was with Truman. And then this is the only position we have of the Harry S. Truman here. It's an older track. They have not pinged their AIS, their automated information system, for about 18 hours. But the last position of Dunham and Eisenhower was up here to the northeast of Port Said, the entrance to the Suez Canal. I want to zoom in here just a little bit and show you a couple of key things here. So Besiktas-M was coming out through the Mark Channel And once it clears the last two buoys, the red and green buoy, it's going to make a hard turn to left to port and head to the northwest. It is heading up into the channel here, the vessel traffic separation scheme, to head out into the Mediterranean and go to Romania. Remember, this ship had come from Jordan. It was scheduled to go to Constanta in Romania and load cargo. We believe Truman and Dunham were heading down this southbound lane, heading toward the entrance of the Suez Canal to meet their pilot. What's not on this chart, and I will show it to you in a minute, are all the anchored ships. There's a mass of anchored ships up here between the vessel traffic schemes, the northwest and the northeast scheme, and then there's a batch of vessels down here in the lower anchorage taking place. So zoom in here a little bit, and we see Besiktas-M heading northbound at about 10 knots. She would have dropped her pilot, so there's no pilot on board the vessel. It's going to make its left turn to port, continue at about 9 and 8 knots, and start heading toward the vessel traffic scheme at this time. I'm going to pause it right here. The Truman and the Dunham would be coming out of the traffic separation scheme here and sailing eastward. We know they're underway. They were not anchored. The Besiktas didn't hit an anchored vessel. This is taking place at 11:45 at night. I can't tell you how confusing this image would look to you if you were up on the bridge of the ships. What you would see here is a mass of white lights from the anchored vessels. You would see the running lights on board the Truman and the Dunham coming at you. All ships have running lights. They have white lights, and then they have red lights on the port side, green lights on the starboard side. So you would see it. However, it is important to note here that while you will have an electronic charting system that integrates your radar and AIS onto everything, notice that Truman and Dunham are not showing their AIS. They have not turned on their AIS. I had some people comment, of course they don't turn on their AIS. Why would you give away their position? This is a crowded anchorage, as you're going to see. There's a lot of ships in this anchorage. And not having your AIS showing could lead to questions about what your intentions of the ships are and what ship you're even dealing with here. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why I'm getting black boxes here show up. But Besiktas is heading kind of on a west-northwesterly course here. And what we see happen here is it's slowed down now, down to 6 to 5 knots. That is pretty quick. It's slowed down. I am wondering if the hit took place at that moment. Back up here just a little bit. You'll see the ship was doing a good clip of speed here, moving along at almost 10 knots. And then all of a sudden it slows to 6 to 5 knots. We see the ship take a bit of a turn to the right, to the left, excuse me, to the left here. And then this continues on, the ship continues on, we get a slowdown in the vessel, and this may be further contact between the ships. And then the Besiktas-M just kind of pivots almost 180 degrees and then comes to a stop almost immediately. The ship is going to anchor at this point, and we see the ship anchor. This is 22:30 UTC time. So this is roughly about 12:30 in the evening, or in the morning, I should say now, on February 13th at this time, local time. The ship will anchor. Let this run a little bit more. Now you see U.S. government vessel pop up here at 10 knots. This is the Jason Dunham. Jason Dunham is on this track line. We believe that Truman was running a track kind of along this line. Let me show you this. So this is something I put together. This is an integration of the AIS tracks from marine traffic. Here's the Dunham, here's the Besiktas, and this is what I believe Truman was doing. It may not be exactly right, and I don't think it is. Truman may be a little further north here, angling a little bit more to the south, but I think Truman was angling this way. And that would put the Truman's bow heading on a kind of southeasterly projection. The Besiktas-M is heading west by northwest. That means they're on a starboard to starboard meeting. That means that Besiktas-M is sailing between Dunham and between Truman. So they're going to go right between them. Now, there's going to be a lot of questions about why doesn't Besiktas-M turn north? and show her red light to Truman and cross in front of Truman. I think Besiktas-M is going to do what commercial ships do. The most minimal course change they need to do, they will do. And more importantly, they're going to try to keep heading toward the west-northwest and head toward the vessel traffic scheme and get out of the area. But it looks like right around here is where the contact is made with Truman. This may be further south a bit, where the contact is made, where the starboard bow, the right front of Besiktas-M, gets under that sponson of the starboard quarter of Truman, maybe gets hung up on the ship. Besiktas-M will pivot and kind of scrape down the right rear of the Truman, inflicting some damage on it. Take a quick look at the weather here. Pulled it up for the exact moment that we have the collision, or a few minutes after the collision, here at 21:57 on 12 February. So the wind at that time was coming from 289, so roughly west-northwest, at about 17 knots. That would have been right into the bow of the Besiktas, and a following wind in sea for the Truman. When you look at current, about a half-knot current, setting toward 117, and then swell and waves give you a direction of roughly around 315 to 320 degrees. So from the northwest at roughly about 1.7 meters, so roughly about a 5-foot swell. Visibility was pretty much unlimited. It was evening, 11:45 at night, so bright night, clear night. So I'm going to replay this again, but this time with vessel traffic, and you'll see all the ships. So here is Besiktas-M coming out of the Suez. Notice you have vessels anchored here to the south, a whole batch anchored here to the north. There is only a thin little area here to get in between, to get yourself out to the vessel traffic separation scheme. These ships have already left. So this is the only open spot that's really open to Besiktas-M at this moment, is to kind of get through this area. And this is where the collision occurs. Probably Truman was coming through here at the same time. Denham, the same time, is coming through this area. You can see a ship, MSC Reef, coming into the area here. You can see the vessel coming in. I'm going to pause it right here because you're going to see vessels pop in. And notice how the ships are kind of coming in just to the north of the area. Huang He, MSC Reef passing at this moment of time. Here is Dunham popping up at this time. It just looks like that Truman was entering into the area right as ships were coming out of the Suez Canal. This is like being in the front doors of a school at the end of the school day, and they open up and all the kids are coming out. That's kind of what Truman kind of found themselves into. This would have put the Truman into a position of a crossing situation, where basically Truman is the giveaway vessel here. You got to kind of rotate this a little bit to get the true perspective here. But this shows you the red running light, green running light. Besiktas would actually be pivoted a little bit more so the bow is facing this way. You would actually have a green on green. You would see kind of green light to green light. So that would have both vessels basically giving each other way, basically stay out of each other's way. What we think may have happened is at the last minute there was maneuvering that went on. This happens a lot, where all of a sudden ships don't quite understand what's happening and they decide to react. And either Besiktas-M turned into Truman, or Truman cut across the bow of Besiktas-M. We won't know this till the investigation is done, but that's where the hit took place. And what we see is the damage to Truman and the damage to Besiktas-M. Besiktas-M got underway yesterday afternoon from the anchorage where the accident took place. It headed westbound and is now off of Alexandria, where the vessel came into port, and now is sitting pierside at this time in the port of Alexandria, probably undergoing damage assessment itself, and along with investigation by Egyptian authorities. So what does this mean going forward? Well, Truman is heading to port, probably to Suda Bay. They're going to have to assess whether or not they can repair the damage and be mission capable again. If they are not mission capable, two things can happen. Number one, they can head to a repair facility, maybe at Marseille or Toulon, or at Algeciras to get repaired. There are U.S. Navy bases at Ceuta Bay and at Rota in Spain, but they don't have a lot of repair facilities and capabilities there. One of the things we have removed from the U.S. Navy is really the ability to do forward repairs. So there's going to be a question whether or not Truman can effect repairs locally, or else the ship is going to head back to Norfolk and head either to Newport News or the Norfolk Navy shipyard. What this means is there will be a gap in coverage. This is from Ian Ellis Jones. He does an update all the time on deployments of U.S. aircraft carriers. Here's the Truman battle group in and around the Middle East. The closest battle group is the Vinson. Carl Vinson is down here in Westpac. The Ronald Reagan is up in Japan. That is the forward deployed aircraft carrier. The only other aircraft carrier that could possibly deploy is on the East Coast. That is the Gerald Ford. Ford did a deployment, wrapped it up in 2023. It returned back, did a refit, a quick overhaul, and it is back up and running. The George Bush is in the midst of sea trials right now. It could possibly come back out if needed. But the other two carriers there are the John Stennis and the deep maintenance. It's not coming anywhere. And then the Eisenhower, which went back and is in the midst of a protracted maintenance itself. So a lot going on here if the Truman is taken out. I want to just one last thing here. This is a perfect example of why we need to look at repair capabilities for the U.S. Navy. I talked about this in a video I did when the USNS Bighorn, a military Sea Lift Command oiler, ran aground off the coast of Oman, and all of a sudden a forward strike group was without a Navy oiler. This was an important learning lesson. This is an important learning lesson right now. What happens when a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is damaged? What capabilities do we have to replace it? You can take the aircraft off the aircraft carrier and put them on a base somewhere and fly the aircraft, but you lose the mobility. And the aircraft are on board Truman too. A lot of people are asking that question. The aircraft are on board Truman. A lot of people asking about why isn't there a greater guard around Truman? Truman's in a crowded anchorage getting ready to go in the Suez. You're not going to have miles of protection. This is what a maritime choke point is. Very tight area. But the damage to Truman is going to be an important lesson to learn whether or not U.S. Navy can effect repairs of damaged vessels. Listen, if I'm going to take out an aircraft carrier, this is a great way to do it. Let me be clear. I would use something other than a 650-foot, 50,000-ton empty bulk carrier. I would use something a heck of a lot bigger. If that ship had gotten hit by Ever Given, 1,300 foot, 400 meters, 200,000 tons, that would have knocked that aircraft carrier out. Let me be clear. That damage would have been horrific had a larger vessel or a tanker or a liquefied natural gas carrier had hit Truman. Lucky you got hit by a empty or laden bulker coming out of Jordan heading to Romania. This is not, in this case, Truman actually displaces the commercial vessel. In most cases, commercial vessels way out displace the Navy vessels. We saw that with Fitzgerald and McCain when those two suffered their collisions in 2017. I hope we are taking lessons and notes from this and realizing we need some forward repair capability. We need some salvage assets. There's only 2 salvage vessels in the entire U.S. Navy, and they're all out in the Pacific. If Truman needed to get towed or needed salvage equipment very quickly, there's nothing close by. The U.S. Navy would have to contract that through commercial salvers to provide assistance. And we saw what happens when ships get damaged and they're under enemy air attack, like with the Houthi. You can't get commercial salvers into the area. You really need Navy salvers to do it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. As we get more information on this event, we will be sure to share it with you. Until our next video, is Sal, signing off.